I want to talk about the New York mayoral race and the victory, the quite stunning and sweeping victory by Zohran Mamdani against, the scion of one of the most powerful political dynasties in all of American politics over the last 50 years, which is the Cuomo family. He's vanquished him and the billionaires behind him and all the Wall Street and real estate interest. And one of the things I love about you, Zed, as a journalist and just as an analyst, is it's always hard to predict how you're gonna see things because you don't at all wed yourself to one party or one side or one ideology. It's one of the things I appreciate most about you. And you've been somebody quite critical of left-wing political movements, especially a lot of the excesses of Black Lives Matter. You've talked a lot about your opposition to this anti-police sentiment and the like. And Zohran, in a lot of ways, comes out of that faction. He comes out of DSA in New York, that kind of left-wing millennial Gen Z crowd that gave AOC the 10,000 votes she needed to defeat Joe Crowley, has a lot of statements riding that Black Lives Matter wave about defund the police and the like. And you seem, at the very least, anti Mamdani. You dislike a lot of the attacks on him. You think they're quite ugly and racist and just sort of improper. And I certainly agree with that. But you also seem somewhat optimistic about him from a governance perspective. I'm wondering how you see him in the context of all the things you've worked on.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that because I did a piece for the Washington Post actually about some of the kind of racial, ethnic, religious backlash. And I think that's taken over a lot of the discussion, right? You have a member of Congress suggesting he should be deported. You have other people suggesting he's an Islamist and so on and so forth. And, that stuff's just, a little bit of a throwback to the Bush era or even Obama era kind of phobias and panicking. But I think the more interesting and sophisticated critique is that okay, Mamdani is 33 years old. He's never run a giant institution before, like New York City, America's largest city. And, just a few years ago, when he was in his 20s, he was fully on board with everything, the DSA, which is a pretty left-wing organization, wanted to do, from defunding the police to changing various requirements within the public high schools about how people get in and kind of relax them to kind of help diversify them or bring in more Black and Latino students. I think he was definitely your kind of run-of-the-mill online left-winger in much of his 20s, right? And I think people are right to have a little bit of skepticism about whether that kind of approach could actually run a large city. But I think also we need to think about how politics works and how people evolve as they rise up the ranks, right? Think about some of the people who've been in political power in our country, ranging from Barack Obama and Bill Clinton to Joe Biden, and sort of how they evolved their thinking over the trajectory of their lives. I mean, Bill Clinton was a kind of an anti-war hippie in the 60s and 70s, and then he eventually became the great triangulator, right? He revived the conservative democratic movement in the United States in the 1990s, right? And I think that pathway and trajectory is actually quite common for Democrats. The difference is, though, with Mamdani, he's doing this trajectory very quickly, right? He's one of the youngest people to ever take the position. I don't know if he's actually the youngest, but he certainly is on the younger side. And so any kind of evolving of his points of view or any kind of trajectory that I would follow would be very swift and narrow, right? And I think during his campaign, he did do certain things, like one, say he wanted to preserve the high stakes test that's used to admit students to the elite public high schools in New York City, right? A lot of sort of Black and Latino activists did not like that test. I think it favors Asians, so on and so forth. And he used to be with those people, right? But he moderated on that issue. He says he no longer is interested in defunding the police. He said he's even open to keeping this current NYPD commissioner who's been there under Eric Adams, right? Doesn't have a reputation as any kind of left libertarian type person, right? So I think in a few ways, Mamdani is showing that, hey, look, it's very different from holding a seat in the state assembly from a very progressive district, from holding the mayoralty of a very large city that I think is probably overall kind of center left, right? I don't think New York City is a hardcore left-wing city. It's not even Portland or Seattle, right? It's New York. It's had Republican mayors in the past, like Rudy Giuliani, and Michael Bloomberg was mayor there as well. I think fears about things like subway safety and cleanliness, about crime, are still present. And I think he does kind of understand that he has to thread the needle and navigate that a little bit. And I think part of what gave me some hope that he might be willing to do that and hear other people out who are not just on, the left libertarian side is that in his campaign, I think he assembled actually pretty vast coalition, right? I mean, he had everyone from, yes, the young DSA kids out in Brooklyn, to Yemeni and Bangladeshi shopkeepers, which were actually part of, I think, Eric Adams's base before, to winning almost 60% of the vote in one of the highest primary totals. I think maybe the highest number of votes for a primary in New York.
Bill Clinton, by the way, was very young when he was elected president. He was, I think, 42, 43, something like that. Very, very young to be elected president. The only experience he previously had was attorney general of a very small state, Arkansas, and then governor of that state. So it's not like he had this massive executive experience. Obama, on some level, might have even been less prepared. I mean, he was in the Senate for like 2 years before he decided to run for president. Had been a state legislator before that. Never was the executive of anything. And, obviously Donald Trump was twice elected, certainly in 2016, without having had any elective office experience previously. I think you have to go back to Dwight Eisenhower for a president who got elected without working up the elective ladder. And, he was a 5-star general who was credited for overseeing the military victory in World War II. So he was certainly someone entrenched in Washington politics for a long time. So Trump, too, is a kind of unique figure. And I think the thing that all three of those have in common, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, is they're extremely charismatic figures who, in many ways, transcended ideology. They kind of couldn't be put in a box. And what all three of them did was electrify not just their base voters, but a lot of people who never voted before, a lot of people who had given up on unelected politics because they just were too disillusioned. And in a lot of ways, I see a lot of commonalities with Zohran and those three examples. But one of the biggest problems the Democratic Party has is with young men. And he won young men by a massive margin. I mean, and it wasn't just that he won young male voters, and even male voters generally, but a lot of them came out for the first time to vote for him. He has this, I heard with Obama once in 2008, an analyst after his victory, and it was a shocking victory just given his trajectory, talking about what Obama did that so few politicians can do is bring out voters who don't otherwise vote. That's sort of the political gold, because you're always going to have the partisan voters who are going to vote for you kind of no matter what. So you have Zohran Mamdani like bringing that electricity, bringing that kind of invigorating that sense of hope. And as you say, appealing to a cross range of voters. There's a lot of caricatures that he only got rich people. In New York, obviously, you can't win an election with just rich people. He actually, I think the only two blocks that he didn't win were the poorest, people under 50,000, who are black voters who tend to be kind of more loyal to the familiar Democratic names like Andrew Cuomo, and the very rich among Democratic elites, which would not be there if he were a more kind of establishment candidate. So I'm wondering what you think this means for Democratic Party politics and how they might, try and improve their standing going forward.
Yeah, actually, I think that the response from Democratic elites, like the slow endorsements, some members kind of denouncing him in some ways. I mean, I think John Fetterman just said that he's not even a Democrat, which is not true. I mean, he was elected to the legislature in New York as a Democrat. He's elected as mayor. He has a Democratic nomination. It's actually Cuomo and Eric Adams who are running as independents. But I think actually the resistance is 100% probably about Israel, right? Like this idea or sense that he's not aligned with particularly New York Democrats, I think, which is, I think it has the largest Jewish population of any city outside of Tel Aviv, probably, or outside of Israel.
That's correct.
I think that someone like Hakeem Jeffries, who is seen as kind of a party manager in the House, who's constantly raising money from people left and right, I think that these people probably are hearing a lot from that kind of donor, bigwig, consultant type class of people who are very much tied into that politics, and that they're kind of trying to walk a line, right? Like, I don't see any of these people really likely endorsing Cuomo or Adams. One reason being they can't win, and two, because I think the Democratic voters in New York were pretty resounding. I mean, it was a victory of about 13 points, which was like very solid margin, right? Like that was not a narrow defeat for Cuomo. So I don't really see them endorsing that side, but I do see the trepidation as probably being mostly related to Israel, because I think Mamdani is seen as someone who is close to the Palestinian solidarity movement, who is close to these factions and groups that I think that make people like Chaim Saban or like major Jewish Dem donors like very uneasy and queasy, right? So they're trying to kind of feel him out in that regard. I actually think if everything else was the same, just like his social policy platform, education, policing, blah, 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 I actually think they wouldn't mind it at all. Like in their minds, they're probably thinking if anything goes too far, we'll just block it in the city council or, so on and so forth. But I actually think the Israel part in particular is very, very dicey for the Democrats, because we've seen a massive swing in public opinion among Democratic voters on Israel. And actually, what's his face? James Carville. He was recently on a podcast talking about this. And the New York Post, of course, took something about globalize the Intifada and was like, oh, he should never say that. Of course, he's never said it.
He never said it. Right, exactly. Yeah.
No, he never said it. But something Carville said was very important, was that Carville said that among younger Jewish voters, Israel is not as big of a deal anymore, right? And I think a lot of that, if you look at like the voter distribution and turnout in New York City, I believe the largest group actually was people ages 30 to 34. So that's Mamdani's age bracket, right? That's kind of younger millennials, right? And I think that transformation that's happened at kind of the voter level has not really translated into Democratic leadership, because their entire lives they were told, you can basically just got to say, we stand with Israel. I'm pro-Israel. And it's very simple-minded slogans. If you say them, then, AIPAC, ADL, AJC, all these groups will not call you anti-Semitic, anti-Israel. They won't spend money against you. You'll be able to fundraise very easily. I think that inculcation to that type of politics for decades, Schumer or someone like Hakeem Jeffries, has been very, very powerful for them. And they weren't quite caught up to where the voters in the Democratic Party were turning on that so swiftly over the past 2 years. And actually, I think James Carville actually knew it exactly. I mean, I think he's a smart guy. He's worked a lot of elections. He knows his stuff. And he understood that for Democratic voters, this is no longer a deal breaker, right? And I think the leadership just old and fixed in their ways, and they're just kind of scared, right? Like one of my Jewish friends actually told me one time that he thinks that institutional Washington, D.C. actually is kind of anti-Semitic, because they think that like, if you say something disagreeing about Israel, the Jews will destroy you, right? Like that's their mindset, right? They're terrified of that. And it's really not true. I mean, there are interest groups that are very aligned with the Israeli government, but like, there's more diversity of opinion than there used to be 10 or 20 years ago, right? There's, particularly among, I think in the Jewish population, there's a generational split and divide. And I think Mamdani saw that. I was actually shocked that he had a nuanced response to being asked about globalizing Intifada. I don't know if I was in his shoes, if I would have given a nuanced response. I maybe would have just been like, I don't say that, and I don't like people saying that. But no, he actually gave a nuanced response, and it didn't seem to hurt him at all in the election. So maybe he even had a better read of the electorate than I did, or than a lot of other people did. So yeah, I just think among 60 to 70-year-old Democratic elites who are used to thinking it's career suicide to say any of this, that's why they have trepidation. I don't think it has anything to do with the social, economic, domestic policy he was talking about. They can always manage that, or trip him up on there if they want. But I do think Israel is the entire reason for any kind of hesitancy on endorsing.
Yeah, I think we're exactly right. I think two good examples of that are Bernie Sanders, who did get pushback. He obviously wasn't the favorite candidate of the establishment, but it was nowhere near the meltdown that we're seeing with Zohran. And that's because Bernie, over the years, despite being critical of Israel, has always been a clear Zionist. I mean, he's always defended Israel's right to exist. He actually, after October 7th, when asked about a ceasefire, he's like, no ceasefire, that would only help Hamas, and AIPAC praised him. So Bernie always has had one foot in that kind of establishment view of Israel, and therefore wasn't very threatening. And you look at, by contrast, Jeremy Corbyn, who, when he became labor leader, the meltdown was severe. He was an unapologetic critic of Israel, and not only was the attack on him that he was an anti-Semite, which was utterly fabricated and insane, but it was revealed by Labor Party's own investigation that they sabotaged him in the general election on purpose, that they would rather have lost to Boris Johnson than won with Jeremy Corbyn. And again, I think that is because of the fear of the Israel issue.
And also, look, Bernie is a Jewish guy. He's comically New York accent, the whole 9 yards, right? that doesn't mean that AIPAC loves him. Like I remember Haim Saban, who's a major Israel-aligned donor, wrote like a really angry letter to a bunch of Democrats about Bernie, and like it was just like a boomer comment thread. But like, he still clashes with that side. But the fact that he's Jewish, he's like an older white guy who's Jewish, does help him, I think. I think someone like Mamdani, a young brown guy, like that just strikes fear in the heart of lots of these people. Like there is an element of racism in it. Because they feel like they can't trust someone like that. Like he's like at the end of the day, they think, okay, maybe Bernie will clash with Netanyahu. Maybe he doesn't like this war, but he's still one of us, right? Like he's still in the family, right? Whereas Mamdani is seen as like a hostile. And I think that is part of it. Like now, on the other hand, if Mamdani acted like Richie Torres and he started defending everything Israel did, I think they would see him as like the greatest asset in the world, right? Like, oh my God, we got one of the brown guys with us. But when he voices the same concerns that, is very common among Democratic voters now, I do think that makes him a threat. And I think they probably think they can't win him over, right? Like, I feel like people who are kind of in the middle, like, I don't know, like a Jerry Nadler type, they can tolerate that Nadler doesn't like Netanyahu. They criticize the war sometimes because, like, he's still in our group and, like, we can still kind of work with them. But Mamdani is like DEFCON 1 for these people, right? Like, I think that's a big part of it.
No, without doubt, without any doubt at all. And, I think that, everything about him just kind of reads as a political outsider. He had no support from the Democratic Party. And I do think it's interesting, too, that if he had even moderated some on Israel, let alone become, this sort of like Richie Torres figure, that would, and this is the change in the electorate that you were referencing with James Carville, although I think I'd go much further than James Carville, which is a lot of these young voters will not support, they certainly wouldn't be enthusiastic about or campaign and canvass for a candidate who is equivocating on what a lot of young Democrats believe is the greatest issue, moral and ethical litmus test at the moment, which is where you stand on the genocide in Gaza. And I mean, it's like the Democratic Party, despite seeing everything that happened in 2024 with Kamala, and how many people didn't turn out over that issue, how many Muslim groups refused to endorse or even endorse Trump over those issues. They're, as you said, it's part being so ossified because of how old they are, and it's just something that they've been indoctrinated with for decades. But also, they are petrified of the pro-Israel lobby. They watched $15 million get poured into a primary challenge against Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, both of which lost. They've watched that happen many, many times. Not that they're omnipotent, AIPAC, but they certainly have a lot of ability to do that, to strike fear in the hearts of people. And I think that's why. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.